we get to talk about the research approach. So when we piggyback off on the philosophical assumptions, you realize that each of those epistemological frameworks was cued into a particular research approach. So what are these research approaches? And depending on your institution and your supervisor, they may mix up research design and research approach. For the sake of this lecture, we are separating them, okay? So when we talk of research approach, there are three main approaches we have. We have the quantitative, the qualitative, or the multi method, or some people will call it mixed methods. It is believed that quantitative research emerged around 2050 AD and was driven by investigators with the need to quantify data. Since then, quantitative research has dominated the Western culture as the research method to create meaning and new knowledge. When I get to qualitative, you will understand why the different genres were set to provide a voice for the non-Western people because of the nature of how quantitative was used. Okay, so what constitutes quantitative method involves a numeric or statistical approach to research. And quantitative research is specific in its surveying and experimentation, and it builds upon existing theories. Methodology of quantitative research maintains the assumption. Oh, forgive me, I have a horrible flu. Maintains the assumption of an empiricist's paradigm. The research itself is supposedly independent of the researcher, and the belief is that data is used to objectively measure reality. Quantitative research creates meaning through objectivity uncovered in the collected data. So the intent is to establish, confirm, or validate relationships and to develop generalizations that contribute to theory. That is one approach. Doesn't mean that that is the perfect one or that is an all-inclusive one. Then the second one is qualitative. Qualitative is described as a research approach that is holistic and involves discovery. It's also described as an unfolding model that occurs in a natural setting that enables the researcher to develop a level of detail from high involvement in the actual experiences. I'm laughing because many times when my students tell me, oh, we want to do qualitative, we want to use a qualitative method, and I ask them, why? The first thing, oh, we want the participants to talk about their experiences. We want in-depth knowledge. I laugh because depending on the quantitative approach you use, you can even sift out underlying nuances of behaviors that people are not even aware of. So anytime people talk like that, I go like, go look at what the experts have said and figure out if your understanding of qualitative is really what qualitative approach is, okay? So qualitative approach involves purposeful use of describing, explaining, and interpreting collected data. Remember, describe, you explain, and you interpret the data that you've collected. It's an inductive approach more than deductive reasoning. And you use a lot of observational elements that pose questions that the researcher, that is you attempt to explain. So there's a strong correlation between observer and the data, which is really different from quantitative because quantitative claims that you stand aside and you don't involve yourself in it. So what the data says is what you just talk about. But qualitative, you provide a level of interpretation in there. And then we have the multi-method, which is a mixture of the qualitative and the quantitative. And I will talk about the different genres and explain what each of these does. Let's see if we'll have time for that, okay? So when we talk of quantitative, we have multiple designs within the quantitative school. I intentionally use this diagram to explain the different types. And I won't be surprised that depending on the authors, they use different names for these things, but the meaning is what I want you to remember. So when you are doing a purely quantitative study, you are using any one of these 4 approaches. You're doing descriptive, correlational, quasi-experimental, or experimental. And when you are doing descriptive, you are using case study or case series, cross-sectional, prospective, and case control. If you're doing experimental, you're either doing a randomized control trial or single subjects research design. And I will describe a little bit about each of them for you. Okay. So descriptive designs are sometimes called case studies. And in qualitative, we also have case studies. Let's see if they are the same. And then you make up your own mind about what you need for your work, okay? Case studies involves data collection from one research subject. On the other hand, descriptive designs can also be case series, where the researchers evaluate data from a few research subjects. When descriptive designs are cross-sectional, researchers analyze variables in their sample of participants, after which non-causal relationships are determined. So when I'm doing cross-sectional, I don't want to say, oh, this one causes this. I'm just looking at a particular point in time and all these people and whatever it is they say they are experiencing. Okay, so in cross-sectional studies, participants are observed at one point and not over a repeated period of time. And many of my responses are from Creswell and Creswell and Patton and Newhart. I have some from Field. And then I suspect many of you are using different texts. When descriptive designs are classified as prospective, and this is where we are, okay, researchers study participants over a lengthy period of time. So another name for prospective studies are called cohort designs or longitudinal study. You realize that seems to be the opposite of cross-sectional design. In longitudinal studies, researchers study variables in a group of participants at the beginning of a study, then conduct analysis, and then go in again and study the same group of participants. However, when case control is used as a descriptive design, what researchers do is to compare participants who share similar characteristics. For example, I want to look at children who have experienced trauma. And so I want to look at participants who lack these and compare them. So children who have experienced trauma, compare them to children who have not experienced trauma. Then I come to correlational design. They are similar to descriptive design in that they share the characteristic of not influencing anything. So they don't control any variable, they don't do anything, they don't attempt to manipulate anything. Correlational designs go a step further beyond establishing associations to determine whether these associations have positive or negative direction. Okay, correlational designs also focus on the understanding of the relationships between and among variables. So while correlational design determine the strength and direction of the relationship, they can also indicate a zero relationship, which means no relationship at all. Okay, and then we come to quasi-experimental. So in descriptive design, we observe and establish relationship. Correlations establish the strength and the direction of these relationships. And yet, these two, descriptive and correlation, they don't establish a causal relationship, as in one causes the other. In quasi-experimental design, there's an establishment of a cause and effect relationship. So one thing causes another. A quasi-experimental design, however, is not a true experimental design because participants are not given random assignments to either control or experimental group. So I am manipulating something, but I am not doing random assignments of, okay, I close my eyes, you go to experimental, you go to control, you go to experimental before I apply it. I just do the application within the groups that the people are already. Okay, then we come to the last one, experimental design. So in experimental design, participants are randomly assigned to either whatever groups that we have. So in Ghana, I've had students who would do 1, No, I actually had one student who did mindfulness study with one group of people and then put the others in control. I have a doctoral student who used two different interventions for a group of nursing students, I think. He used solution focus for one and CBT for one. I have a student in US who used an experimental design into three different groups. One group, I think she wanted to establish if spiritual loneliness could, does spiritual well-being reduce spiritual loneliness and increase something else. And so she put the participants within three groups. One of them did a dyad of a particular prayer book. Another one did a dyad of mindfulness, and then the other one did the solo version of what she calls the Lectio Divina prayer, and then she wanted to. So that's what happens in experimental design. The beautiful thing in experimental design is you have two ways of going about this. You can decide to do a randomized control trial where you treat the people as if they are in the lab, or you can choose to do the single subject research design. The unique thing with single subjects is it's so consistent with the kind of work we do. And the weird thing is when many people hear this single subject, they assume it's a qualitative design because the sample size is so small. But single subject research design is an experimental design and involves repeated assessments of particular behavior over time in at least one individual. So single subjects, the minimum sample size is 1, the maximum is 8. Okay, and this methodology has been used in multiple areas of research, including psychology, education, psychiatry, and rehabilitation. It has many names though. Some people call it intra-subject replication design, or N=1 research design, or single case research design, or single subject research design, or intensive design. And this design is reported to be an evaluative method used rigorously to test the success of an intervention on a particular subject. So it's a quantitative design. It critically investigates the behavior of each of a smaller number of participants. And each of these participants serves as its own control. Okay, so whereas randomized control trial, we have a control group. This one, I myself, I am set as, I become my own control before you apply. So my control is how I behave normally or ordinarily before the intervention is applied. In the next video, we'll look at the different genres of the qualitative research, and then we'll see if there are any similarities and differences between and among these. Okay, all right. Cheers. Bye.